A simple act of kindness. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when John decided to go for a quick drive. He had just finished his work for the week and wanted to clear his head. As he drove through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, he noticed something unusual. On the side of the road, a car was parked with its hazard lights on. A woman was standing beside it, looking frustrated and stressed. John slowed down, curious to see if she needed help. As he approached, he saw that the woman was trying to change the flat tire of her car. She was struggling, her face flushed with frustration under the heat of the midday sun. John's first instinct was to help. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of his car. "Hey, do you need a hand?" he called out to her, his voice warm and friendly. The woman looked up in surprise, as though she hadn't expected anyone to stop. Her eyes seemed tired, and her posture was that of someone who had been trying for a long time without success. She smiled faintly, clearly relieved to see someone willing to help. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "I've been trying for the past half hour, but I just can't seem to get the tire off." John walked over to her and took a look at the flat tire. It was a little stubborn, but nothing John couldn't handle. He had changed his fair share of tires in the past. He pulled out the tools from the trunk of his car and got to work, chatting with her as he worked. The woman's name was Lisa, and she explained that she had been on her way to meet a friend when the tire suddenly went flat. She was new to the area, didn't know anyone, and had no one to call for help. That's when John had appeared. As he worked, John noticed Lisa's frustration seemed to fade with every word he spoke. She was grateful for his kindness, but still looked uneasy, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. John kept the conversation light, trying to make her feel comfortable. He told her funny stories about his own car troubles, and it made her laugh a little. It was clear that she needed a moment of kindness, and he was happy to provide it. Soon enough, the tire was fixed, and the spare was in place. John wiped his hands on a cloth, feeling satisfied that he had been able to help. Lisa stood by, watching, her expression a mix of relief and surprise. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "I don't know what I would have done without you. I was starting to feel really helpless." John smiled. "No problem at all. It's no trouble. Just glad I could help." Lisa hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I wish I could repay you somehow," she said, still sounding unsure. "I know it's not much, but I'd really like to thank you for stopping. It means a lot." John shook his head. "No need for that. It was just a simple thing to do. I'm just happy you're good to go." Lisa smiled, though she still seemed like she wanted to offer something. "You really saved me today. Maybe someday I can return the favor." John gave her a friendly wave as she got back into her car, ready to leave. "Take care, Lisa. Safe travels." As he watched her drive off, John couldn't help but feel good about what he had done. It was just a small act of kindness, but to Lisa, it had made a big difference. He was used to helping people when he could, but something about this situation felt different. The way Lisa had looked at him, her expression filled with gratitude, stayed with him long after she was gone. John climbed back into his car, still feeling that sense of satisfaction. He started the engine and drove off, thinking about how little things like helping a stranger could sometimes change a person's day for the better. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, mattered in a world that sometimes felt cold and disconnected. As he drove through the streets, John didn't know that this simple act of kindness would soon lead him into a situation far beyond what he could have imagined. It was just a flat tire and a brief encounter, but life had a way of surprising people. What seemed like an ordinary day for John was about to become anything but ordinary. He had no idea that in just a short time, a series of events would unfold that would pull him into a world of secrets, power, and danger. For now, he thought the day was over, and the only thing left was to enjoy a peaceful evening at home. But the universe had other plans, and John's world was about to turn upside down. all because he had helped a stranger in need. A mysterious visitor. The following day, John went about his usual routine. He worked from home, answered emails, and took care of a few household chores. By the time the afternoon rolled around, he was feeling good, relaxed after a productive day. He didn't think much about the woman he had helped the day before, Lisa, or the tire he had changed for her. It was just a simple thing. After all, he wasn't the kind of person to dwell on small acts of kindness. But then, as the evening approached, something unexpected happened. The sound of a car pulling up to his driveway caught his attention. John glanced out of the window, thinking it might be his neighbor coming over or someone delivering a package. But when he looked closer, he noticed a sleek black SUV parked in front of his house. His first thought was that it was probably just another random visitor, but something about the vehicle made him pause. It wasn't a typical car that anyone in the neighborhood drove. It looked expensive, and its tinted windows gave it an air of mystery. John frowned slightly, wondering who could be inside. He opened the door to his house and stepped outside, his eyes narrowing as he took in the unfamiliar vehicle. As he walked toward the SUV, he noticed the passenger side windows slowly roll down, and a man's voice came from inside. "John Carter," the voice asked, smooth and authoritative. John stopped in his tracks, feeling a slight chill run down his spine. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" he replied, keeping his tone calm, though a part of him couldn't shake the unease building in his chest. The man inside the vehicle didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at someone else in the car. Then he turned his attention back to John. "I believe you helped a woman named Lisa yesterday," the man said, his voice low and serious. John's heart skipped a beat. Lisa, the woman from yesterday. The one he had helped with her flat tire. He hadn't expected her, or anyone else, to show up at his door. But the fact that someone had come looking for him, especially in such a mysterious way, caught him off guard. Yes," John said cautiously. "I helped her out with a flat tire yesterday. What's this all about?" The man's eyes glinted as he sized John up, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave a short nod and motioned toward the back of the SUV. John could see that the windows were dark, but he could make out the shape of someone seated inside. It seemed like there was more to this encounter than a simple thank you for a good deed. Before John could speak again, the man opened the door to the SUV and stepped out. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded a quiet sense of power. The moment he stepped onto the ground, John instinctively took a step back, as if something about the man made him uneasy. The man smiled faintly, but it wasn't a warm, friendly smile. It was cold, almost calculating. "We've been looking for you, Mr. Carter," he said with a smooth voice that made John feel like he was being watched more closely than he liked. "We have some business to discuss." John frowned, his mind racing. Business? What kind of business did this man have with him? He couldn't understand why someone would come to his home over such a simple thing as helping a woman change a tire. Nothing about this situation felt right. "Business," John repeated, his voice betraying the confusion he was feeling. "I'm not sure I understand." The man's smile remained as he glanced over his shoulder. "Let's just say that helping Lisa wasn't as random as you might think. I think it's time we had a little chat about what that act really means." John felt his heart beat a little faster, and his stomach tightened with nerves. He had no idea what this man was talking about, but the ominous tone of his words sent a wave of unease through him. Was Lisa involved in something dangerous? Had she gotten him mixed up in something he didn't understand? He looked at the man carefully, weighing his options. He could refuse to talk, go inside, and lock the door. But the stranger's presence made it clear that this wasn't something he could just ignore. There was an underlying threat in the air, something that told John this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," John said cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just helped her with a flat tire. That's it." The man stared at him for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. "Trust me, Mr. Carter, it's not that simple, but we'll discuss it soon enough." Before John could respond, the man turned on his heel and returned to the SUV. Without another word, the vehicle began to pull away, leaving John standing in his driveway, utterly confused. His mind was racing, and 100 different thoughts flooded his head. What had he gotten himself into? Why was this man so interested in something as innocent as helping a woman change her tire? What did he mean by business? John had no answers, but one thing was certain: his life had just taken an unexpected turn. Something told him that this mysterious visitor and Lisa's strange connection to him were just the beginning of a much larger story. The hidden truth. The next morning, John woke up feeling the weight of yesterday's encounter lingering in his mind. He tried to shake it off as he went about his morning routine, making a cup of coffee and flipping through the news. But his thoughts kept returning to the black SUV and the strange man who had appeared on his doorstep. The man's chilling words echoed in his head. "We've been looking for you, Mr. Carter." John couldn't understand why something as simple as changing a tire for a woman had led to such a mysterious visit. What could it mean? The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up in his mind. Who was Lisa, really? Why had this man mentioned business? And what did this all have to do with him? His phone buzzed, snapping him back to reality. It was a message from his friend, Michael. "Hey man, you all right? You seemed a little off yesterday. Let's grab lunch today." John sighed and replied quickly, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a weird thing happened. I'll tell you about it later." As the day went on, John tried to distract himself with work, but it was hard to concentrate. His thoughts kept wandering back to the SUV. The idea that someone was watching him made him feel uneasy, like he was being pulled into something bigger than himself. He decided to take a walk to clear his head. Maybe some fresh air would help him think things through. As he stepped outside, he noticed the street was unusually quiet. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. John walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, trying to make sense of everything. As he passed by the local park, he spotted someone sitting on a bench. It was a woman, reading a book, with dark sunglasses perched on her nose. At first, John didn't think much of it. But something about the way she was sitting, so still, so calm, caught his attention. There was something almost deliberate about it. He paused for a moment, watching her, before deciding to keep walking. But just as he took a step forward, the woman looked up and met his gaze. Her eyes, despite the sunglasses, seemed to pierce through him. And for a brief second, John felt a chill run down his spine. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him made him uneasy. He quickly turned away, brushing off the strange feeling. There was no reason to be paranoid, he told himself. Still, the encounter stayed with him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Later that afternoon, John received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. "Hello," he said, trying to mask the nervousness in his voice. "Mr. Carter," came the voice on the other end. It was smooth, calm, and oddly familiar. "I think you need to meet with us." John's heart skipped a beat. It was the same voice from the SUV. His stomach tightened with dread, as the words from yesterday replayed in his mind. "We've been looking for you, Mr. Carter." "I'm not sure what this is about," John said, trying to stay composed. "Who is this?" The man on the phone paused, then replied, "Let's just say I'm someone who can help you understand what's really going on. But you need to come to us. You don't want to get involved in something bigger than you can handle." John's mind was racing. The words "something bigger" echoed in his head, and he felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but he knew this wasn't going to end with just a simple explanation. "I'm not sure I want any part of this," John said firmly, though doubt crept into his words. "You don't have a choice," the man responded coldly. "Meet us at the address I'm sending you, or we'll come to you." Before John could respond, the line went dead. John stood there for a moment, staring at his phone in disbelief. His mind raced with thoughts and possibilities. Who were these people? Why were they so interested in him? And what did they want with Lisa? Just as the call ended, John's phone buzzed again. He looked down at the screen and saw a text message with an address. It was an office building across town, a place he had never been before. The message was simple, but its implications were clear. If you want answers, be there in an hour. John's heart began to race. This was no longer about helping a stranger with a flat tire. Something much deeper was going on, and he had no idea how to stop it. He looked at the clock on the wall. He had an hour to decide if he wanted to get involved in whatever this was. But something inside him, something deep down, told him that walking away might not be an option. The sense of urgency in the voice on the phone made it clear that whatever was happening, it was bigger than him. Taking a deep breath, John grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. The mystery of the SUV, Lisa, and the strange man was only just beginning to unfold. As he stepped out of his house, the wind picked up, and John couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a dangerous turn. The road ahead would be far from easy, but he knew one thing for certain. He was about to discover the truth. The meeting. John arrived at the address with a sense of dread creeping up his spine. The office building loomed ahead, a towering structure of glass and steel that seemed to reflect the cloudless sky above. It was a modern building, sleek and impressive, but to John, it felt more like a fortress. As he walked toward the entrance, his footsteps echoed off the stone pavement, amplifying the silence that seemed to surround him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Every instinct told him to turn back, to forget about the strange phone call, the mysterious SUV, and the woman he had helped the day before. But something else inside him urged him forward. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the feeling that his involvement in this strange situation was inevitable. Either way, John knew there was no turning back now. When he entered the building, the lobby was immaculate, with polished marble floors and modern art adorning the walls. There was a receptionist behind a sleek counter, her eyes glancing up as John approached. "Can I help you?" she asked with a polite smile. "I'm here to meet someone," John replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask any further questions. She simply typed something into her computer and handed him a visitor's badge. "Take the elevator to the top floor. They're expecting you," she said, her voice businesslike, but not unkind. John nodded and walked toward the elevator. As the doors slid shut behind him, he felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if the walls of the building were closing in. The elevator ascended quickly, and when it finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal a long hallway lined with glass offices. He stepped out, looking around for any sign of the people who had contacted him. At the end of the hallway, a set of large, polished double doors stood open, and inside, he could see a few people gathered around a conference table. They all turned to look at him as he approached. One man, tall and well-dressed in a dark suit, stood up and extended his hand. His smile was smooth, but there was something about the way his eyes watched John that made him feel uneasy. "Mr. Carter, we've been expecting you," the man said, his voice calm and confident. "Please come in. We have much to discuss." John hesitated for a moment, but then, sensing there was no way out, he stepped inside the room. The man gestured to an empty chair at the table, and John sat down, glancing around at the others in the room. They were all well-dressed, but none of them looked particularly friendly. Their eyes seemed to scrutinize him, sizing him up, as if they were assessing something far beyond the surface. "You're probably wondering what all this is about," the man continued, sitting down across from John. "I can assure you, you're not in any trouble. We simply need your help." John raised an eyebrow, his suspicion growing. "Help with what?" I don't even know who you people are." The man smiled again, as if this was all part of some carefully rehearsed act. "We know this may seem sudden, Mr. Carter, but we've been keeping an eye on you for some time. Your act of kindness yesterday didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it's exactly why we're here." John's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" "Lisa," the man said, as if the name alone should explain everything. "The woman you helped with her tire." John felt his heart skip a beat. He had been trying to forget about Lisa, but hearing her name here, in this strange office, made everything feel real again. "What about her?" "Lisa is very important to us," the man continued. "She's been working with us for some time now, but her position requires certain confidentiality. We knew that when you helped her yesterday, you were a man of character, someone who would act without expecting anything in return." John shifted in his seat, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place, though he still didn't fully understand. "Why are you telling me this? What does it have to do with me?" "Let me explain," the man said, his voice suddenly taking on a more serious tone. "Lisa's involvement with us is part of a much larger network, one that requires secrecy, discretion, and a network of reliable people. People like you. You see, Mr. Carter, you are not just a good Samaritan. Your actions have aligned you with our cause, and we need you to continue helping us. But first, we need to know that we can trust you." John leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had no idea what this group was talking about, but he couldn't deny that they had his attention now. His act of kindness, something so simple and ordinary, had somehow led him into the middle of something much bigger. He felt a mix of fear and intrigue, unsure whether he should run or listen to whatever these people had to say. "You're asking me to get involved in something I don't understand," John said cautiously. "I don't know who you are or what you want from me." The man nodded, his expression unfazed. "That's exactly why we're here, Mr. Carter. To explain things to you, to make sure you understand the gravity of this situation." John swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He didn't want to get involved in whatever this was, but at the same time, he couldn't walk away. The mystery, the danger, and the uncertainty of it all had a strange pull on him. He had already stepped into something he couldn't fully grasp, and now there was no turning back. The man leaned forward, his eyes locking with John's. "You're already in this, Mr. Carter. There's no going back. The question now is, will you help us, or will you walk away and risk everything?" John's mind swirled with 1,000 questions, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was never going to be the same again. Whatever this was, he had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The answers he sought were just out of reach, and he would have to decide whether to step deeper into the unknown or walk away and face the consequences of doing so. Uncovering the truth. John's mind was still spinning as the man's words echoed in his head. "There's no going back," he had said. The gravity of the situation weighed on him, but the curiosity gnawed at him. What had he really gotten himself into? The man across from him, still calm and composed, seemed to sense the confusion. He gave a slight nod, as if he'd been expecting this reaction. "I understand this is a lot to take in, Mr. Carter. But trust me, you're not alone in this." John took a deep breath, trying to center himself. The room felt colder now, the silence between him and the man growing heavier by the second. The other figures in the room remained silent, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for his response. "What is this all about?" John finally asked, his voice firmer than before. "What is it that you want from me?" The man leaned forward, his demeanor shifting to something more serious. "Lisa, as you know, is involved in a delicate operation, one that requires the utmost confidentiality. But what you don't know is that her role is not just about her work. She's connected to a much larger network, one that's been operating under the radar for years. And we believe you, Mr. Carter, have the potential to be a part of it." John's brow furrowed. A part of what? What kind of network? The man smiled, but it was a thin smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I think you already know. You've felt it, haven't you? The strange way everything seems to be falling into place. The coincidence of meeting Lisa, of helping her, of being at the right place at the right time. It's all part of a much bigger plan. John could feel his heart rate picking up. He had known something was off ever since he'd helped Lisa, but he hadn't imagined anything like this. The pieces were starting to connect, but it didn't make any sense. Why him? Why had Lisa come to him for help? Why me? John asked, his voice shaking slightly. You showed compassion when you didn't have to, the man said, his voice low. Most people would have walked past. They would have ignored Lisa and gone about their day. But you didn't. You helped her. That's rare, Mr. Carter. We'll be in touch, Mr. Carter, he said softly. Think carefully. The next step is up to you. John didn't answer. He simply walked out of the room, his mind a storm of confusion and fear. He had helped someone, and now he was about to be pulled into something far beyond his understanding. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The unseen consequences. The day after the meeting with the mysterious man, John couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in his chest. He tried to go about his normal routine, getting up early, going to work, and doing his best to focus, but his mind was a whirlwind. Every time he glanced at his phone, he wondered if today was the day they'd reach out. He couldn't stop thinking about the words he had heard the day before. There was no turning back. John had always considered himself an ordinary man. He worked as a mechanic, lived a simple life, and stayed out of trouble. But now everything had changed. He couldn't even remember the last time he had felt at peace. That simple act of kindness, changing a woman's tire, had set off a chain of events that was completely out of his control. He had no idea what they wanted from him, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him every hour, every minute. After work, John sat on the couch in his modest apartment, flipping through the channels on his TV, but not really watching anything. He couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting to Lisa and her sudden disappearance after he had helped her. She had seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable in that moment. But now, she was at the center of something far more dangerous and important than he could ever have imagined. He had promised himself that he wouldn't get involved. He had told himself that helping her was just a good deed, nothing more. But the man had been right. He had made his choice when he helped her. There was no going back. The question now was, could he really live with the consequences? The thought of turning down whatever offer they were about to give him made his stomach turn. What if this wasn't just some secret network helping people? What if it was something worse, something dangerous? He wasn't naive enough to think that every organization with a good cause was truly doing good. There were always strings attached. As night fell, John stood up and walked to the window. He stared out into the dimly lit street below, trying to clear his mind. His phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence, and his heart skipped a beat. He didn't have to look at the screen to know it was them. His fingers shook as he picked it up. It was a message from an unknown number. Meet us tomorrow. We'll explain everything. We know you're ready. The next step begins. John's mind raced. His first instinct was to delete the message and pretend it never happened. But deep down, he knew that wouldn't change anything. The choice had already been made for him. He had been pulled into something bigger than himself, and there was no escaping it now. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed the events of the last few days. His encounter with the man, the strange feeling of being watched, the mysterious message. It was all too much. He wanted to believe that it was just some misunderstanding, that everything could go back to normal if he simply walked away. But as the hours passed, he knew that wasn't an option. The next morning, John woke up to a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was the fact that he had finally made up his mind to face whatever was coming. Maybe it was the understanding that, for better or worse, his life had changed, and there was no turning back. Either way, he knew what he had to do. After work, he drove to the address given in the message. It was a small, inconspicuous building on the outskirts of town. There were no signs or anything that marked it as important. In fact, it looked like an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place where no one would dare venture. John parked his car, his heart pounding in his chest. The place was eerily quiet. He stepped out of the car, glancing around, and then walked toward the door. His footsteps echoed in the empty street, amplifying the silence. He tried the door. It opened easily, as though it had been left unlocked on purpose. Inside, the air was stale, and the faint smell of old wood filled the room. There were no lights on, but he could make out the silhouettes of a few people standing in the shadows. His eyes adjusted to the dim light as he entered further. One figure stepped forward. It was the man from the other day. The same man who had spoken to him in the office, whose calm voice had promised that there was no turning back. His face was unreadable, but his eyes had a quiet intensity that sent a chill down John's spine. "You came," the man said simply, his voice smooth. "I knew you would." When he arrived at the location, a sleek, modern building tucked away in a corner of the city, he parked his car and took a deep breath. He was here. He had made it this far. But what was waiting for him inside? He walked through the entrance and was immediately greeted by the same man who had spoken to him before. His expression was serious, but there was a certain glint in his eyes, like a person who knew something the other didn't. He motioned for John to follow him. Inside, the room was dark, except for the soft glow of overhead lights. A large table was set in the center, with several people seated around it, their faces hidden in shadows. John couldn't make out any details, but he felt the weight of their eyes on him. He was being judged. It was clear that this was no ordinary group. "Welcome, Mr. Carter," the man said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You've made it this far. Now it's time to decide. Are you truly ready for what comes next?" John didn't speak immediately. He couldn't. His throat was dry, and his mind was racing, filled with thoughts of what might happen next. There was so much he didn't understand, so much he couldn't even begin to grasp. But one thing was certain. This was his moment. This was the moment that would determine whether he was ready to become part of something bigger than himself or walk away and pretend it never happened. The man spoke again, breaking the silence. "You've shown us your willingness to act. Now we need to see your strength. The choice you make will define your future. Will you join us and help shape the world, or will you walk away and fade into the background?" John closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. There was no easy answer, no right or wrong, just a choice between two paths, each one leading him further into the unknown. Finally, John took a deep breath and spoke. His voice was steady, though he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm ready," he said. The man nodded. "Good. Then let's begin." As John stepped forward into the room, he knew there was no turning back. He had made his choice. The world he had known was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, far more complicated. But there was no fear in his heart, only the thrill of the unknown and the certainty that whatever came next, he was ready for it. This was just the beginning.